Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Alright, it's Friday. We're going to do a space rocket race because we're going in honor of Earth Day because, you know, that's on next week. And this video is history by another historian. We went to the local library and they had this piece about one of the places. When I went blank. Anyway, you'll find out because I can't remember. I want to say mountain, but it's not a mountain. It's not a peak. So my brain is just broke, and I don't remember what to call it. So you're just going to have to find out when we get there. Anyway, here's a race. Excuse me, ready? Here we go. For a butte or... And no, it's that piece that we did at the library with, was it Black Elk? Harney Peak?
Oh, it used to be Harney Peak, and now it's Black Elk Peak.
Okay, I couldn't remember which way was which. I went to say Black Elk, and I'm like, no, wait, they changed it to Harney, and I'm like, no, it's the other way around. I couldn't remember which way it was. Yeah. All right.
It started as Harney Peak, and now it's Black Elk Peak.
Started as Harney, and then they decided to make it Black Elk because apparently he was...
Native Americans were offended, yes.
Because people were offended and had their little feelings hurt. And anyway, let me do our shout-out song. You guys ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. Here, shout out. Wait. That's not right. I messed that up, didn't I? Hang on a minute. Let's try this again. I blame you. That's why I don't like distractions when I try to do these things. I get all confused, and I blame me. Ready? Here, let's try this again. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. That's how that goes. I remember the words. It's his fault. He distracted me. Beat him up. Blame him. Anyway, hopefully you'll enjoy a different historian rambling about local place that is changed names for reasons of reasons. We have a rocket race here. Alright, so we got She Stole, there's To Eats, there's Rum, there's Scully, there's Patty, there's Wisdom, there's Brits, there's MJ, Alice, Reef, Blistering, Crazy Train, there's Shucklin, there's John, there's Melinda, there's Cal King, Consume, Patty, Blistering Railroad, Principal. There's Frugal and Amanda and Pin. I keep digging and Jacob. And let's see. There's Dave. There's Carol. There's Reef and Strong Mind. Northern Woman. And Stace. And it looks like it's Griselda. Hold on a minute. Alright, I almost posted this without Miss Griselda's channel. And she's got some videos with cooking and traveling. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Some shorts. And then, of course, her lives are just kind of... Oops, that is not what I meant to do. Yeesh. Are just hangouties. So check her out. Like, share, comment, have a good day.
All the members would like to greet Joe, please.
Hello,
Joe. You got to say hi to Joe every time. Anyway, we're going to start right off with our presentation with Dave Quinn, who will be talking today about General Harney.
Right.
I got it right this time.
Well.
keep wanting to use some other general's name for some reason.
Yeah.
Anyway,
General Blackwell.
I'll let him introduce himself.
Okay. Hello, I'm David Gwynn. I'm retired here in Rapid City. I've lived in Rapid City since I was 10 years old, and that was 60-some years ago, 63, 64 years. And I'm very interested in history, even though I was a physician. And and the other thing is I'm very interested in local history, I think because my father might have come out with General Harney or whatever, I mean, that was a few years ago. Okay, so we'd like to talk about, who was General Harney? Why is the highest mountain in South Dakota named after him? And why is it no longer named after him? And so we're going to discuss those points. And my organization has got to be Harney first, and then we'll come back to the other two questions because it doesn't really weave together nicely. Okay, so the highest peak in South Dakota was known as, by the white man, as Harney Peak from 1857 to 2016. It was formally changed to Harney Peak in 1906. Up until then, people either called it Harney or Harneys, or maybe we didn't even have a formal official U.S. Geographical Survey name for it. And who was he? Well, William Harney was born in Haysboro, Tennessee, which is a suburb today of Nashville, in 1800. His father was an army officer, which is pretty rare because we didn't have much of an army in 1800. It would cost too much, and we had a very thrifty government. And at 18, he got an appointment to the U.S. Navy through a recommendation of a friend of his older brother. That friend had a little bit of pull. His name was Andrew Jackson, who lived nearby. And if you've ever been to Andrew Jackson's place, that's also a suburb of Nashville. And he went off to report to the Navy, and he immediately decided that wasn't for him. So he switched over to the Army and went back to serve under Andrew Jackson. So he served in the Army from about the age of 18. So he's going up. It's a very small army at this point. If you need a soldier, there aren't a whole lot of them to choose from. So in 1825, he was put on an expedition up the Missouri River to visit with and get treaties signed by the Indians living along the upper Missouri. And then in 1832, he served in the Black Hawk War under Zachary Taylor. And that was the war that Abraham Lincoln served in as a militiaman. So that was kind of a case of throwing the natives out of Illinois, I think. So in 1833, he married the daughter of probably the wealthiest guy in St. Louis. And they got married. They had 3 children. In 1850, she and the children moved to Paris and stayed there until she died in 60, and he visited them twice there. So it must not have been a bitter divorce. There was no divorce. They stayed married, but they lived half a world apart. Now remember, she's the daughter of the wealthiest guy in St. Louis. So there might be things you can enjoy in Paris that are not available in St. Louis. So I don't really know. And this part of my information mostly comes from Wikipedia, which has this much, like 2 paragraphs about his personal life. So anyway, there's not much of a personal life. In 1834, a famous incident in St. Louis where he beat Hannah, an enslaved woman, to death. Now, we were discussing this. We don't know why he did it. There are records from the trial and stuff. I suspect she starched his pajamas. I'm not sure. I don't know, So, yes?
What year was that?
1834. 34. So he's 34 years old, married 1 year. I presume that Hannah belonged to his father-in-law, who was the wealthiest guy in St. Louis. He could afford to spare a servant or two. Anyway, he was indicted by a grand jury, fled the state of Missouri. He returned to Missouri for trial, and nobody will believe this. A white judge and a white jury acquitted him.
What?
So
No.
I know, yeah, no, not possible. I agree. So from 1835 to 42, he was a major in the Second Seminole War. We might know this as the Indian removal and the Trail of Tears. So 35 to 42, that's a long time to be stationed in Florida and down south. He earned a reputation then as a, quote, daring and ruthless Indian fighter.
Ooh.
Yeah, and he was studying under the best. Actually, Jackson was president, so he wasn't studying under Jackson at that point, but he already learned how to do it. In 1846, we had another war, one of our few back then, and he was a colonel of dragoons in the Mexican War. He was with Zachary Taylor at Buena Vista. He was with Winfield Scott, played an important role in the victory at Cerro Gordo, where the center wasn't doing too well and his wing collapsed the Mexican army. And there was another victory at Chapultepec, another one of his notorious episodes. This guy, I don't understand why he keeps getting promoted, in which he was in charge of hanging 30 captured deserters who were the Irish and German Catholics who had deserted to go fight with the Mexicans. And this was called the St. Patrick's Battalion. So there was a lot of deserters fighting for the Mexicans, probably on the basis of religion, but also we didn't treat our common soldiers very well. I don't think the Mexicans did either. But so he hung them. There's no way they should have been hung. They were convicted by a court-martial of desertion, and by all the rules of war, they should have been shot. So I don't know why but the hanging was an insult, for one thing. And anyway, he was court-martialed for that. And the court-martial accused him of being cruel to prisoners. And Winfield Scott said, I want him out of here. And the president of the United States, who was Polk, said, oh no, this is political. You don't like him because he's a Democrat and you're a Republican. Or actually a Whig. You're a Whig, he's a Democrat, this is all political. And so they breveted him to Brigadier General and sent him back to Scott. So I don't know, this is a common thing for people who know the Civil War or earlier. The United States was thrifty. We did not want to have a lot of high officers getting officer pay. So we frequently used the brevet rank just until we needed them, so you could bring them back down to their previous rank and not have to keep paying them the general salary. Back then there was no retirement, so people stayed on until they died or couldn't do it anymore. Anyway, so he went back down to colonel, and he was assigned to, and this is an interesting word, the material I'm reading isn't that old necessarily. He was assigned to Indian control in the southern plains. Mostly that was working in Texas. But yeah, I think it's interesting that we had a special assignment for Indian control. And he apparently did a good job. He was on and off. He kind of seemed to alternate in and out of being the guy in charge with some other officer. And he got granted a leave to go to Paris to visit his family. And he's literally on his way to Paris when the Grattan affair occurs. So we're going to diverge into what the Grattan affair is, although I think I have probably a very knowledgeable group here. The Grattan affair in 1854 a member of the Brule band, I just learned it's Brule, not Brule. The Brule band killed a cow that was owned by a Mormon immigrant crossing on the Oregon Trail, probably on his way to Salt Lake City. And the immigrant complained to the commander at Fort Laramie and demanded compensation. But he didn't want just compensation, he wanted his cow. Now, his cow was long gone. But so actually, the chief of the Brule offered him 2 horses. And the guy said, no, I don't want 2 horses, I want my cow. So the commander, and then they refused to turn over the guilty party. So the commander of Fort Laramie sent a newly graduated West Point officer, Grattan, and 29, except that Fielder says it's 23 men, to arrest the Indian. Now, this is right out of a John Wayne movie or something. I mean, say send this guy who just got in from the East Coast to go beat the Indians. And on attempting the arrest, there was a little bit of confusion, a little bit of excitement, and the Army shot the chief.
Oh, no.
Killed him. At which time, all 29 of them were killed. Or 23, depending on whether you believe Fielder or, yeah. Okay, so at this time, there was some conflict in the West because the Department of Interior had just taken over the Department of Tribal Affairs from the Army. So a commission met and determined that the arrest was illegal. They shouldn't have been arresting him anyway. And it wasn't the business of the Army. And so therefore no punishment was called for. And normally we would say, well, that's justice, except that the Native Americans took this as a permission to go on the raiding path. And the Brule, who were apparently I never knew they were the big problem makers, but they started raiding ranches along the Niobrara, along the Platte. They started attacking wagon trains on the Oregon Trail. Things were just going bad, and so now we have a problem. And who are you going to call? Is there anybody we know of who was a daring and ruthless Indian fighter and veteran of the Seminole Wars, or of the Indian removal, or whatever you call those wars? And the answer is they called Harney. Now Harney was on his way to France when this happened, and he had to come back. He never got to see his family or wife.
Oh, man.
And so he came back and was put in charge of the northern plains, and so he was to lead what the internet keeps calling a punitive expedition against the Brule. Now we have a problem. Remember, the War Department wants to put the Indians back in their place, but the Department of Interior is in charge of Indian affairs. And there might have been some jealousy between the two.
What? No.
Because the Department of the Interior and the Indian Office, it was called the Indian Office, prohibited tribal members from helping the Army, or they would lose their rations and stuff. So they didn't want them helping. And also it was still legal for the traders to sell arms and ammunition to the Native Americans. The Army didn't like that. So after much delay and stuff, they finally dispatched the Army, Harney's little detachment, to go find the Brule in Nebraska. Now we were in Nebraska too, but they actually are in Nebraska. So they're going out to western Nebraska. And at this point, as he's coming across, his Native Americans refer to him as the Hornet. He gets another name, and he gets 2 more names. I guess they just change your name when they feel you deserve it. it took them 53 days to get from Leavenworth to Harney. I mean to Kearney. Carney, I'm sorry. Gina's been beating that into me for a month now, and I guess, anyway, for Carney. So it took them 53 days. I mean, I could drive that in 6 hours? I don't know, not long. But anyway, so in the meantime, he also was planning to winter at Fort Pierre, which they had just purchased from a very clever real estate agent and trader. And they sent 6 companies and the supplies for the winter up the river to Fort Pierre. And we'll come back to that. With that group was Governor Warren, who was a topographical engineer, which means map maker. So he was with the group that got sent to Fort Pierre. And in Kearney, they're waiting there, organizing, and in the meantime, Warren completes his job of mapping the fort and comes 300 miles south across uncharted badlands and sandfields with 6 mixed blood Indians. Remember, the real ones aren't allowed to help them without losing their benefits. But apparently, maybe the mixed blood ones weren't getting any benefits, I don't know. So, and they came across this uncharted territory to hurry up and get down before Harney left. Warren knew that the Brules were in western Nebraska. Now, I don't know if he knew that because he was told that by natives at Fort Pierre, or everybody knew that because they were raiding ranches and attacking wagon trains and stuff. I don't know, but for some reason he had information that was considered important. And he got there, told General Harney, I know where they are. They're out west, along the Platte River. And so they left Fort Kearney and went up the Platte and found Little Thunder and 250 followers. Small number, but these were the bad guys. These were the guys that were attacking wagon trains and raiding, 250 of them though only, at Ash Hollow on the Blue Water Creek. While supposedly preparing to negotiate with them the next day, he moved his troops around to surround them. And at daybreak, the infantry attacked from the south, and the cavalry was waiting for them. And when they tried to go up, the cavalry attacked them from the north. And so 600 troops versus 600 actual troops versus 250 Indians, most of them probably women and children. It lasted 30 minutes. 4 soldiers were killed. 86 Indians were dead, and we'll come back to that in a second, and he had 70 prisoners. One of the controversial things here is that many of the women and children had taken shelter in a cave, and they just fired artillery into it. And by this point, artillery means exploding shells, not just a solid ball. So that was kind of controversial. And in fact, the New York Times, the failing liberal New York Times said, the lamentable butcheries of Indians by Harney's command have excited the most painful feelings. But these people were New Yorkers. You know, who cares? I'm sure the people in Sioux City said, way to go. So he then marched on to Fort Oak. He also, I might add, confiscated their lodges. I will read he burned them. No, he wanted them for himself. He confiscated them because the army issue tents were pretty useless in bad weather and the cold. So he confiscated their lodges, and then he marched on up to Fort Laramie, where he called a conference of the Lakota. He stated his non-negotiable terms, and then took his small army through the heart of their territory, which they thought was pretty immune to white penetration, in the fall. And maybe it is global warming. It sounds like the weather back then in the Badlands was worse than it is now, although I'm not saying it's good now. So his route was across the panhandle of Nebraska, crossing the Niobrara, and then picking up the White River, so probably about where Fort Robinson is, somewhere there, and then going up the White River until, well, I have a map here, but up the White River until the White River kind of makes a curve going more east. He at that point cut straight across, went across the Bad River, and they paralleled that. You know, when you're close to a river, you have a lot of up and downs when you're cutting the breaks. So it looks like he went quite a few miles inland from away from the river, and then paralleled it to Fort Pierre. So the Indians were very impressed by this, especially since the weather was so bad that no smart Indian would be out in it. And at this point is when he earned the name Mad Bear. He was not named Mad Bear because he killed women and children. He was named Mad Bear because no sensible person would have marched across South Dakota in October, November, back then. So when he got to Fort Pierre, the buildings were in horrible shape. They were almost uninhabitable. The supplies he'd sent up the river were still down in Council Bluffs. There was no grass for the horses. There was no firewood for the men. As I say, it was a good real estate agent that sold the government this thing. And so he broke his army, which wasn't that many. I mean, there were 600 people. I mean, we're not talking about an army like we would talk about 10 years later. Broke them into 3 groups to scatter along the river. The comfortable ones had Indian lodges to sleep in, including Harney. Harney got an Indian lodge, but he was general. He was brevet general. But he got a lodge. He spent the night. He did spend the winter with them, which you got to respect him for that. Anyway, the army was required at that point to buy lodges only from the traders. It was a pretty significant middleman markup here. And actually, after this, the army changed the rules so they could negotiate directly with the Lakota to buy lodges for future winter camps. Overall, everybody was cold and miserable, but the Lakota were still odd. And in fact, the next spring they announced, we give in to all your terms, which were to stop raiding the Platte River settlements, to stop attacking wagon trains. Most of them agreed to some of the more controversial ones, that they would stop attacking the Crow. But this was, not all the natives agreed with that. And were there any things that and this may have been from an earlier treaty, Harney made it clear that white men could never penetrate the hills, and that the Lakota had permission to drive them out by physical force if they tried to. That was part of Harney's terms that he dictated to them. So anyway, they agreed to it. He also decided Fort Pierre was just a horrible place to be, and ordered them to build a new fort down at Fort Randall, which became the fort for the not upper, but for that part of Missouri. And now you're probably wondering, what about the mountain? But let's finish with Harney first. We're only up to 56. So he leaves in 56. And at this point, some other group has to come to get that first Treaty of Laramie that Senate never endorsed. Harney might have dictated the terms of it, but he wasn't the one who actually wrote it or signed it. He just told them, this is what you're going to do. Okay, so now they called him back, and he was assigned to a number of other short-term assignments. So he was sent to Utah for what we call the Utah War, and we may know there were really no serious direct Mormon army engagements in this, but we may know it from the Mountain Meadows Massacre, where a bunch of immigrants on their way to California were killed by Mormons, and then they tried to frame the Native Americans, but it didn't stick. Everybody knew, even then, even at the time, everybody knew it was you guys that did it, not. So that was part of this Utah War. As I say, there were no serious engagements directly between the Army and the Mormons. And then he was sent to another hot spot, which was Bleeding, Kansas. And this was that business with popular sovereignty, that breaking the agreement with the Missouri Compromise, that there would be no slavery north of the Mason-Dixon line, except for Missouri. And so now they say, oh, no, we can't have that. We're going to let the settlers in the territory vote on whether to have slavery or not. And some of the people in Kansas wanted slavery, some of the people in Kansas didn't, and they started killing each other. And important guerrilla action of this one is John Brown's Potawatomi massacre of a bunch of innocent slave owners in retribution for some other slave owners having killed a bunch of abolitionists in Lawrence, Kansas. So anyway, so he was sent there. I can't tell that he solved it, but he was sent there briefly, and then they pulled him out. And one of his greatest moves here, they sent him to command the Department of Oregon, where he almost caused a war with Great Britain. And this is known in American history as the Pig War. So what happened is, when they did the Boundary Commission, as you know, as you might or might not remember, for 40 years, the United States and Britain agreed to not decide what part of Oregon was American and what part was British, because nobody lived there anyway. It was just a bunch of furs and traders. And so when we finally did decide, we had a border commission, and they decided to extend the 49th parallel all the way out there. But then when you hit the sounds and the islands, it became a little tricky. And there were some islands there that it was not clear which side of the boundary they should be on. So, think about it. These people are negotiating this in London or Paris, or, and they're trying to decide what to do in Oregon, where they didn't even have accurate maps, let alone, So there was this island, San Juan Island, in fact, and they hadn't really decided. So there were some British on one end of it, and there were some American settlers on the other end of it. And I think they were both owners, both the owner of the pig and the owner of the American farm were both Irish immigrants. And a British pig came over and dug up the potatoes and ate them in the American settler's garden. And the American settler did what any good American would do. He shot the pig. And at this point, it becomes an international incident. And the Americans agreed to pay the owner of the pig like $100. And we've heard this before. I don't want $100. I want a pig. I don't want a pig. I want my pig.
Have some bacon.
yeah, right. So again,
Let me just regurgitate that.
Yeah, so in both the case of the cow and the pig, it's as if they're deliberately trying to stir up trouble.
Just being ridiculous.
Because in both cases, the Americans admit, we shouldn't have shot your pig. We're sorry, here's some money. No, we don't want money. Or, I'm sorry that my young men killed your lame cow. Here's a couple horses. No, we don't want that. We want to start a war. So anyway, so that's known as the Pig War. Now, so as part of the Pig War, he dispatched Captain George Pickett. And yes, it is that George Pickett to the island to defend American interests. In the meantime, the British decided to wait until the commander of the Pacific Fleet arrives with his fleet to help decide. Now, the Americans were vastly outgunned. And when the admiral arrived with the fleet, he said, "I'm not going to start a war over a pig." And he refused to attack, even though they would have easily won. And then later on, so at this point, though, the War Department did what anybody would do in a case like this, where this guy almost caused an international war. They promoted him to a full general.
Yay!
and pulled him back to St. Louis. So they had to get him out of there, and they did. And in the meantime, actually, in the long run, the commission decided, a commission that consisted of like a British guy, an American guy, and a Swiss guy or something.
Fun.
They gave the island to America. So it's now American. So anyway, but at the time it happened, it's not actually clear whether the settler was trespassing in English territory or the pig was trespassing American territory. Okay, so anyway, he was called back, promoted to a real brigadier general, and given command of the Department of the West, which was St. Louis. I believe we could say he's back in the Indian control business, since I imagine that's what the Department of the West did. At the time he was promoted, there were only 4 generals in the U.S. Army. And when the Civil War broke out, he's still in charge of the Department of the West in St. Louis. At this point, there were only 5 generals in the U.S. Army. And so when the South seceded, Missouri was a border state. There was slavery, but most of the people in St. Louis, for sure, were anti-slavery. And there were many anti-slavery people living in the country. So a civil war broke out in Missouri, where the militias in the countryside, which were generally secessionists, were attacking the settlers. The militias in the city and the army in the city, but actually the army didn't participate at this point because Harney was in charge of it. He wanted to stay peaceful. They were having riots. People were dying. Harney's niece was married to the chief Confederate officer in the militia. His family was from Tennessee. His father was Unionist, but he was appalled that white people are killing each other. So he agreed. He signed what was called the Price. Price was his niece and nephew-in-law. Anyway, he negotiated the Harney-Price Treaty, which basically said that the abolitionist governor of Missouri agreed to stay with the Union. The Confederate militias would be left alone in the countryside, but they would not bother Unionist settlers. And that the troops would stay the federal troops would stay in St. Louis. Basically all he wanted to do is tamp things down, hey, we're all Missourians, let's not kill each other. We'll let the rest of the country decide this. You can imagine this did not go well with the Unionists in St. Louis. Also, you can imagine that the militias in the countryside did not leave Unionist settlers alone. And so he was called back to Washington and replaced. So quick to this, there's 5 generals in the Union Army at the outbreak of the war. 2 of them went with the South. 2 more of them were from Virginia and Tennessee, and they stayed with the Union. 1 of them was from New York, and he stayed with the Union. But so Harney was called back to D.C. and expected to be given field command. After all, I'm the third senior general in the whole U.S. Army now, who after two of them leave, and Winfield Scott can't even get on a horse because his health is so bad. Oh, he was also the youngest of the generals, and he was 60. He would have been 61. The next youngest was like 70 something. And then Winfield Scott was in horrible shape. You always often see that he has to be lifted and put on a horse by a crane. So he goes back to D.C. and one funny incident at this point, I didn't realize this, the Confederates captured him at Harper's Ferry. Now I didn't know this because actually the Confederacy isn't even formed yet. This is before the Confederacy had organized. It turned out Harper's Ferry changed hands 12 times during the war, including once before the Confederacy was even formed, where they hadn't even had their little meeting in the Constitution. So they captured him. And they said, hey, General Harney, we've captured you. How would you like to take command of one of our southern armies? We've already got two of the senior. If we could just get you, we'd have 3 out of 5. And he said, no, I can't do that. I'm loyal to the Union. And they said, well, as one Southerner to another, we'll let you go this time, just for old time's sake. Remember, this guy had served with, you don't remember, because I didn't tell you. He'd served with Jefferson Davis, he'd served with Pickett, everybody knew everybody, and it was a small army. Everybody knew everybody. So I don't know who captured him, but if it was Stonewall Jackson or Robert, in fact, I think it might have been Robert E. Lee, but whoever it was, they'd probably served together in St. Louis or Illinois or Oregon or somewhere. So good old boys here, yeah, we'll let you go. So he goes to Washington expecting a field command, and they didn't trust him. Now, they trusted Thomas, for instance, one of the main Union generals, even though his family was fiercely Confederate down in Virginia. But they didn't trust this guy, but he had family in Tennessee, he had family in Missouri, he had people on both sides of the side, and plus maybe they didn't like his Price-Harney agreement to let the rest of the country settle this without us. Anyway, so he was given a desk job. And, yes, Winfield Scott got a desk job, but Winfield Scott couldn't have done anything else. But Harney, he's 61 years old, he feels like he's in the prime of his life, he feels so strong he could beat another old woman to death if he had to, and they are going to put him behind a desk in D.C., pushing papers and doing supplies, that kind of stuff. So Harney was very unhappy, and after 3 years of this, he resigned his commission. Now, Lincoln actually had pushed everybody else out. All the people that were senior to him had been pushed out anyway. So I figure maybe he quit because he quit before he could be fired, maybe. So that old guy who invaded New York City to stop the riots, he had been actually fired by Lincoln. These are numbered, yes, okay. So he resigned. I don't remember where he went right away, but given that St. Louis was peaceful and his wife had died and the children had moved back to St. Louis, I imagine he went back to be with his family in St. Louis. Okay, so he was called back to serve on the Indian Peace Commission in 1865 and 1867. and he was continuously in conflict with the government because he thought they should they should agree to the terms that had been agreed to in 58. Somebody corrected me on this. I mean, I know he was here in 56, and the treaty that was never ratified by the Senate was 68. And when was the fake treaty of Laramie? I meant 50. I meant 58. Yeah, 58. So he thought the government should stick to what had been agreed, and the government had ideas of adding more restrictions. So at this point, the Indians gave him a new name, and his new name translates as the man who always keeps his word. Except they didn't do him any good because they threw him off the commission and wrote the Treaty of Laramie the next year. So you don't, just because you're right doesn't mean you're going to win. So anyway, he retired to Mississippi, where he was a neighbor of his old friend, Jefferson Davis. And they could get together on the porch and drink lemonade or whatever and relive the old times on the frontier. And then when Jefferson Davis died, he went down to Orlando, Florida. Who knew they were already going to Orlando that early? I suppose it was because the villages hadn't yet been formed. So, anyway, he died in Orlando in 1889. He was born in 1900, so he was 88 years old plus some. And he's buried in Arlington. So finally, I know you want to know how that mountain got named. Okay, well, first of all, let me show you where Harney did on his Mad Bear March. Okay, so this is a map of South Dakota and Nebraska. So Harney left Leavenworth. Oops, that's the wrong one. Here. Oh, I know, because Leavenworth is actually down here. And he had to get to Fort Kearny. Oh, sorry. Has to get to Fort Kearny, which is here in Nebraska.
It's okay, I memorized the map.
And then they picked up the interstate from there. And they go up the interstate, which also was the Platte River, which meant you always had water for your
They drive under the Kearny Arch to do it?
I imagine they might have even built it. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, so they went up the interstate, and up in this area they found the Brule. Did anybody else not know this Brule? Am I the only one that didn't know
I
that?
learned it like 2 years ago at this state history conference.
Yeah.
And like these Burl got up and kept talking about themselves as Burl, and I'm like,
What happened to the Brule? Yeah.
They got cooked. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, right. They got flamed. Anyway, okay, so, and this is Ash Hollow. Now, notice these are Brule who are today up there, I think. Are they Pine Ridge, right?
right.
Okay, yeah, so they're up here, but this is where they were then, and at that point, they were allowed to be in western Nebraska. In fact, the original treaty agreed that they could go hunt on the Republican River, which I don't think is even on my map. I'm not sure.
It's below,
it's in Kansas. It's in Kansas, isn't it?
It's the next major U.S. highway through Nebraska below Interstate 80 is on the Republican River.
Okay, well, the Republican River is down here somewhere, and that was considered by the whites, by Harney at least, by Harney, that was part of their treaty rights to hunt. Now, we were going to settle along the river. Both Harney and Warren agreed that western Nebraska was unsuitable for white settlement and we should just leave it with the Indians, let them keep it. Okay, so then from here, after he killed a bunch of them, captured a bunch of them, he goes to Fort Laramie. Now, Fort Laramie is right there.
In Wyoming?
I didn't have enough, yeah, in Wyoming. I didn't have enough room to glue a little piece of the Wyoming map. It's not very far over there on the Platte River. And then when he left there, he comes up across across the Nebraska Panhandle up to the area here, Fort Robinson, we know it as. And then on up the river, and then at the White River, like curves way over here. And he cut across somewhere near Wasta.
Okay.
And got up north, and this is the Bad River down where I've got my marker. So he came up and paralleled it into Fort Pierre. So, and then when they left, they went left by the river. As I say, in the meantime, I think they did get some supplies through, but I mean, Council Bluffs, that's a little far south for their supplies to be stuck.
Yep.
Yeah, so, anyway.
How far via the Missouri?
By the Missouri?
From Council Bluffs to Fort Pierre via the Missouri with them?
I don't know, but I think the problem is the Missouri was pretty unpredictable, both high and low. The steamboats could not make progress in high water, and the steamboats would go aground in low water. And if you read Life on the Mississippi, Missouri River pilots got paid a lot more than Mississippi River pilots because of the difficulties in navigation. Okay, so that's what he did that impressed everybody so much. So now, Lieutenant Gouverneur Kemble Warren. So that's Gouverneur, Gouverneur.
Wow.
And that wasn't named after a governor. There actually was a politician that his parents named after and named Gouverneur Kemble, or Gouverneur or somebody else. So Governor Goumble, Governor. How's that for a mouthful? Anyway, he was with the topographic engineers, and he was assigned to Harney's army. So he was sent with the group that went up the river to Pierre. And then this bold green line is roughly exactly how he got down to Harney. And amazingly, I mean, I have his map, but because you can't really read the small rivers and creeks and stuff, and it's missing the roads and towns, as far as I can tell, his trail basically followed the highways today. I mean, which means the highways were probably following some kind of a natural route. So he was headed south here, then he cut over here to get onto this highway, and then that's all actual highway. And some of these positions I can exactly place because he talks about crossing some creek or some intersection, but a lot of this is just speculation from a map that's that big with a bold black line going down it. So this is all in 1955. 1955.
1955?
Yeah,
1955.
Yeah. Time travel.
So they used the Model Ts on the interstate then.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, this is all in 1855. Coming up from Fort Leavenworth to here, out to here, back to here. And Warren, after getting back to here, got on a boat, went to Washington, D.C., where he was assigned to write up his maps and reports from that winter. So he did not get the privilege of spending the winter with the troops like Harney did. Okay, so anyway, he was dispatched there, joined here. His report, I'll give you some references, but I didn't get them typed for you. Anyway, his reports are just appalled at the slaughter at Ash Hollow. In fact, everybody's reports were appalled at the slaughter at Ash Hollow. So he, in the summer of '56, he got money to go return to the Northern Plains to survey from Nebraska to the mouth of the Yellowstone and then up to the Powder River along the river. So it must have been really comfy. He went up by boat part of the time, getting off to make maps, went on up here, went up to the Yellowstone along, and then he went back the same way. So that was his what he did with his summer. for his report. And then he went back to DC for the winter and wrote up that report. And then he got the funding he really wanted, which was for a major survey of western Nebraska. I know you didn't know that was all of western Nebraska, but it is. So this one, they go up the river. Okay. Well, here, let me talk about this, then I'll show you the route. Okay. So he got his funding for a major survey. They had a hard time crossing the sandhills. They ran out of time and supplies. Fort Laramie was waiting for supplies when they got to Fort Laramie, and so they were stuck there for a while. He dispatched one group up to just survey this part of Wyoming, and they concluded that this part of Wyoming was better for white settlement than Nebraska because they have springs there. The water was a little more predictable. We wouldn't think so. I mean, we wouldn't think it was either one was settled. But you know, they're thinking ranching. They're not thinking corn farming or soybeans. They're thinking ranching. So water is probably more important than. So finally he gets supplies, and it's late. It's September. And he figures, you know, I don't think Congress is going to give me any money for another survey. So I better run with it while I'm out here. So he breaks his already tiny group into two. And he's going to take one up to the Black Hills. And the other one's going to survey the Niobrara. And when he goes to the Black Hills, oh, and they had a horrible time getting to Fort Laramie because they didn't take the Oregon Trail. They went up some little river I never even heard of called the Loop. And he concluded that the Loop was not suitable for settlement and very bad traveling. So he took that. So he dumped his wagons and used only mules to travel light, left most of his gear at Fort Laramie, and they set out to try to cover as much as they could before the weather turned bad. Incidentally, this is where we need Wyoming again. I thought I knew where he went. I started to draw the line. He's going to go here and cut across here and come in on Beaver Creek. Well, I know where Beaver Creek is. Isn't that Buffalo Gap? Yeah, okay, no, that's not what he's doing at all. There's another Beaver Creek over on the Wyoming side, which goes straight north. So basically, he caught 385, went up 385, and then where it turns off to go to Lee Deadwood, took the left one and he went to Inyacar, where the Indians found him. So the Indians found him at Inyacar, and he was a smooth talker. I tell you, I mean, we would have had no Indian wars if we had had more wars. So the Indians pointed out that the agreement with Harney prohibited whites from entering the hills. And Warren said, yeah, you're right, I was there. That's what we said. And then they said that they were allowed to drive out white penetrators. And said, oh, that doesn't apply to the Army. That only applies to settlers and gold seekers. That doesn't apply to us. And then they gave him permission to survey the western fringe of the hills, like where he'd already been and along in there. So now they said, and we're going to get you with our big chief. Our big chief will come talk to you, and we will talk about what we're going to let you do. And the big chief did come, and he'll be here in 3 days. Well, he didn't show up in 3 days. So Harney took off and was cutting across the southern hills somewhere. I don't know where, but we're talking about south. He's not going through the heart of the hills. I figure he's either going through Hot Springs, or that would be a good guess anyway. He's cutting through the hills when the chief, whose name was Bear's Rib was the big chief of this area, caught him and said, hey, you can't be here. You're in the hills. This is my territory. And so again, give them some gifts, give some talking, have some. Actually, the Indians were sharing their meat with the whites because the whites had agreed not to kill meat because that would have scared the game out of the area. So actually, they had agreed not to kill bison and animals because the shooting might drive away the food supply, and there were bands moving around in here. So anyway, the Indians gave him some meat. They gave him some gifts. They had a nice negotiation, and but this is interesting. He agreed that we weren't allowed to be in the hills. And he said, well, how about if we just go up the eastern side of the hills to Bear Butte? And Beresford said, okay, but no more. So now he cuts across somewhere, I'd say Hot Springs, or maybe this time he does go through Buffalo Gap. That might be a natural way. And then they go up the eastern side to Bear Butte. From Bear Butte, they climb Bear Butte. They want beautiful views of the hills. This would be a great place in the future to survey the hills. And another thing is, he concedes in his notes, and that the Indians know it. The reason he's there is to find locations for future forts to Indian control. He knows that, they know that, so he did say that Bear Butte would be a great place for a cavalry post, which incidentally we're all missing a presentation on Fort Meade right now, or at noon, up in Sturgis, yes. Okay, so after they got to Bear Butte, they set out to go back, and the agreed spot to meet the other half of their expedition was down here. So I'm just guessing here, I mean, they name all the rivers he crosses, but you're going to cross all those rivers no matter how you get from here to here. You're going to cross the Cheyenne, the White, but this is known because it was actually a coordinates on their GPS. They agreed to meet at that point, which is on the Niobrara River. So they get down there, join up with the other half of their expedition, and on October 17th, 2 days after they got back to the Niobrara, there were 4 inches of snow. And the going was hard. Remember, they don't have wagons, thank goodness. They wanted to go to Sioux City, and they decided we can't make it to Sioux City, so they headed for Fort Randall. And they got to Fort Randall. The survey of the hills was pretty good. He gives a actually accurate cross-section of the rocks, and he talks about the racetrack, and that's what they called it. That's what the Native Americans called it, the racetrack. He gives an accurate thing about how the different layers of limestone and sandstone and up to, so I think he might have slipped some expeditions into the hills a little ways to get this information. No gold though, no gold, so that's good. Needless to say, he also comments that the highest peak is about 6,700 feet, going up from a base of 250 to 350 feet. Now, the actual number is 7,229.41. So he is off by quite a bit, but still, I mean, remember, he didn't even have a baseline to work off of. I mean, you know, the guys that made the mistake most recently at least were working off of a railroad survey. He didn't even have that, so he was just guessing. And he was pretty good. Naturally, being a loyal guy, even though Harney was now fighting over pigs in Oregon, or maybe he was fighting secessionists but anyway, he named the highest point on his map after his commander, General Harney, who had been the one that brought him out there. So that's where Harney's Peak got in. So it's the survey of 67. As far as I can guess, unless they saw it like from the bluffs above the Cheyenne when they crossed it, which they should have, right? We can see Harney from the Badlands if you get up high. Harney and Warren wouldn't have even been close to the mountain in 55. So 57, he named it 55, 57. So now I want to read you some things from, now neither of these people ever wrote autobiography. Both of them have lots of reports to letters to friends, reports to the Army, reports to the Geology Survey. Gouverneur Warren's wrote this many things, but they're all titles like a survey of western Nebraska, or he also surveyed like some of the coastal ports. He did some work in Rhode Island. He got around as a topographical engineer, and every one of those resulted in a report. But here's some of the things he said. Incidentally, if anybody from Wyoming, his route was Rawhide Creek to Old Woman Creek to the South Fork of crossing the South Fork of the Cheyenne to Beaver Creek, and then on up to Innicara. So all of this is like 385. No, I'm saying 385.
It's 85. Yeah, by Lusk.
That's the 85. Yeah, he probably had pie and Lusk. He probably had pie and Lusk or whatever.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Anyway, so here's some of the things he wrote, and basically they considered it inevitable that the Native Americans were going to have to become farmers and change their way of life. However sympathetic they might have been, this is destiny. This is not my fault. I have nothing to do with it. It's happening because this is destiny. So he writes here about when he's with them negotiating with Bears Rib and stuff. Their feelings towards us, under the circumstances, were not unlike what we should feel towards a person who should insist upon setting fire to our barns. So he's talking about the fact that they're not going to shoot the game because that would deny them food. He also writes when they're negotiating and promising Bears Rib that, we won't enter the hills, we know that we're not allowed to. He says, it was almost cruelty to the Indians to drive them to commit. He was vastly outnumbered. At no point was there any question of putting up an armed resistance. He had like 15 men or something at this point. And at one point he violated all the rules by inviting the Indians to come visit their camp and just letting 100 Indians wander through and look at their tents and look at their fires and stuff. And it's like, what, you let the Indians into your camp when you should have been forming a defensive perimeter? It's like, we couldn't defend it anyway. We wanted to seem friendly, and it worked. It worked. Anyway, so he says, it's almost cruelty to the Indians to drive them to commit any desperate act which would call for chastisement from the government. So in other words, it would be bad for the Indians if they wiped them out. It would be bad for him, but it would be bad for the Indians too. And then when he's talking to Bears Rib, all they asked, this is his paraphrase of what Bears Rib told him, probably through a translator. All they asked of the white people was to be left to themselves and left alone. That if the presents were sent to the Indians, that they not go to war with the Crows and their other enemies. They did not wish them. War with them was not only a necessity, but a pastime. Bears Rib said that General Harney had told them not to go to war, and yet here he was all the time going to war. So that's kind of an example of do what we say, not what we do. Don't ask me how Bears Rib knew that Harney had been sent off to Utah, Kansas, and Oregon, but anyway, he did. And then another thing from his, and these are extensive reports. I just don't know that he ever published anything for general publishing. He wrote, I have always found the Dakota exceedingly reasonable beings. what they yield to the whites, they expect to be paid for. And I have never heard a prominent man of their nation express an opinion in regard to what was due to them, to which I do not concur. Okay. So, Warren's saying this. Yeah, I didn't find that much actual direct Harney material. I say Warren's bibliography is this long. It's just mostly not anything he published. So for 169 years it was Harney. This is not to say that there were not South Dakotans who disagreed or disapproved. In 2014, Basil Braveheart of Pine Ridge proposed that it be renamed Black Elk Peak. Yes.
Yay.
Yeah. Black Elk Peak, after El Dakota Holy Man that we all know. The area around the peak was already named Black Elk Wilderness. The South Dakota Board of Geographical Names debated this change in 2015. The alternative, Hinhan Kanga, or Congo, I don't know how to pronounce it, which means the making of owls, was considered and provisionally approved. However, its accuracy was in doubt. Many people thought that applied to the needles, not to the peak. Because, I mean, if you use your imagination, maybe those needles kind of look like an owl to somebody. And also, the formal proposal in front of them was for Black Elk. Now, the second part could have easily been fixed. I mean, they could have brought forth another proposal if they really cared. But anyway, they decided not to change the name. And that went over like a lead balloon. So shortly, even that same year, they changed their mind to recommend, so they recommended Black Elk Peak, Hehaka Sapa. We all recognize the second part of that, Sapa. So on August 11th, 2016, the U.S. Board of Geographical Names formally accepted the South Dakota Board of Geographical Names recommendation. And then briefly, for years, the height of the peak was accepted at 2,244. However, I have 44 here anyway. But more accurate measurements in 2016 found it to be 7,232, and yet I also have 7,229.
Oh, so they can agree.
Well, this was a non-government survey. So I think the reason why somebody was telling me they were up there and they're still selling signs that have the 7,244 number on it, or 42 on it, but I think it's just a case of the United States Geographical Service has to do its own or solve the question. In the meantime, though, there's no question it's still the highest, because everything is probably too high in the hills. So if they lose 18 feet or whatever, Bear Mountain and Crook's Tower and Terry Peak will probably all lose the same amount. So Harney is definitely the highest. I have more information here, but I want to, do I have time? Yeah. Have I talked for an hour?
Where are you at?
Hour? I can't believe it. Okay, sorry. We're going to play a quick.
We're enjoying it.
Okay, I want to know, and I only looked at ones over 100 feet. I mean, over only the top 100 mountains. I want to know Black Hills Mountains, named after Indian fighters, and Black Hills Mountains, named after Indians. And I'm out. The floor is open.
Crow Peak up in Spears area.
That's named. Yeah, I actually put that down as named after Indians, even though it's not an Indian. Yes.
Oh, it's not named after. I thought it was named after.
But that's okay. Yeah.
You have Custer Peak.
Custer Peak.
Yeah, Custer Peak. In fact, there's Custer Peak and Custer Tower. No, I'm sorry, Custer Peak and Custer Mountain.
Cook's Tower or General Cook? Yeah, Cook's Tower.
Yeah, Crook's Tower, that's another Indian fighter. And how many do we have there? Oh, we got Custer twice there. Okay, and the other one, I'm kind of cheating because he wasn't exactly an Indian fighter, but he helped him. Warren Peak. Okay, now we have Crow Peak. We have two more that I found in the top 100 that sort of are Indian.
Fairview.
Oh, well, actually, I have Bear Butte down here as possible, yes. So at least we adopted a accurate translation of the Native American term. Okay, I don't know what it means, but Odakota Peak, which is on that Bear Mountain Ridge, that sounds like a Native American word to me.
What about O'Neill Pass? Isn't that a German O'Neill?
I don't know, might be. I didn't have enough time to Google them to see.
What about Inyakara?
Well, okay, that's enough. But you're right. No, I agree. In fact, Inyakara was Inyakara when Warren got there.
Exactly.
He didn't even name it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're right. Warren Inyakara. We have a peak in the Black Hills named War Eagle. Anybody know who War Eagle is? Every time you drive 29 south out of Sioux Falls, you see a statue. He's the Indian up on the bluff above Sioux City.
Oh.
There's a statue of him. He was a Yankton Sioux,
Nice.
born in Minnesota, lived in Iowa, died in Iowa.
And then he built a
And-
mill in northwest Arkansas.
What?
There's a mill, there's a town in northwest Arkansas called War Eagle, it has a mill.
Okay, well, it might just be a good name. I mean, maybe it's an auspicious name to name your. Actually, you don't get your name when you're born, do you? But anyway, War Eagle was important in the settling of Iowa and Minnesota as a go-between. Both his daughters married white men. Anyway, but he, as far as I know, never came west of the Missouri River, except maybe to not North Sioux City, what's the one in Nebraska? South Sioux City, right? Yeah, he might have gone to South Sioux City, but he never came out here. So I don't know why we named a mountain after War Eagle, but he's the other one. So why don't I open it to questions? I'm sorry, I had no idea. Yes?
When you're talking about the lodges that they're allowed to, can only purchase from the middleman,
Yeah.
what is a lodge? Is it something portable or?
Yeah, well, it's portable if you have enough horses. It's the Indian, what we call teepee. It's heavy rawhide. I mean, it's not lightweight. They don't scrape it and chew it. It's heavy. Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. And it's double layered. And you can have a fire in it to keep warm. And it's what we would consider a teepee.
Okay.
And you weight it down with rocks, and then you leave the rocks for people today to go out and say, oh, it's a teepee ring.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Circle.
And the teepee ring stays there until somebody else puts up a teepee somewhere near there and needs to move the rocks.
Because why wouldn't we put it where else?
Yeah. So yeah, the lodges are what we consider teepees, and they're way better adapted for a Dakota winter than a canvas tent. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I may simply have missed this, but you said, I think in 2014, there was a proposal to change
Yes.
the name.
Yes.
Was that a result of a long bubbling issue? I mean,
I think it was. I think everybody
what was
knew
the
that.
justification?
Everybody knew that Harney was a harsh person. Now, I wish to point out we still have a Custer Peak, a city of Custer, a county of Custer. There's Custer County in Montana. I think Custer was probably far worse than Harney. I mean, basically, Harney was the guy who ended a war in one winter and with one battle. I mean, so in a way, he may have prevented a lot more bloodshed by putting an instant end to it by his reputation. On the other hand, his reputation, this guy was court-martialed. Well, no, he was indicted by a grand jury. He was court-martialed. He was pulled out of his command in Oregon for starting a war over pig. I mean, and what did we do? We kept promoting him. But I also think that if we had given him an army, he might have ended the Civil War faster. Yeah. Harney in the east and Grant in the west. Yeah.
Well, so like he was constantly in trouble with military authority.
Yeah.
But was that normal? I mean, were there other people? Because didn't Custer have some problems too?
Custer was court-martialed at least once. You're right, and then they kept him on too.
Did they think of this as like, why this just shows he's feisty and he's got to fight and stuff?
Well, okay, so Harney was a colonel of dragoons. Now, a dragoon is a horse soldier. Custer was a colonel of cavalry. You don't want your cavalry to be too smart. Because if they're too smart, you tell them to charge the guns. They might. So actually, I think the mistake in the case of Custer was he should have never been given an independent command. I mean, somebody else should have been the one to tell him whether or not the attack is appropriate.
The handlers didn't do a very good job.
Well, Custer, you were horsing around. I mean,
yeah. Well,
sorry.
So I don't know. I don't know whether this is normal. I don't know whether it's normal for cavalry officers. Jeb Stuart was in trouble a lot too. I mean, basically, we can partly blame him for the disaster at Gettysburg because he disobeyed orders and rode off to just show off a little. Pickett was
Pickett was
knocked out.
right through the middle and got butchered.
Right.
Yeah. Pickett followed orders,
That's
which
right.
he
followed orders
didn't
like
think were a good idea.
No.
And he was right. But yeah,
But he followed the orders.
What?
But he followed the orders.
he followed orders, which is what you do in the army. Yes.
I just have kind of a crazy side story
Yeah.
here. Last week, my uncle and I are very, very close, especially in age. He's 3 years older than I am.
Okay.
So we were talking, and I mentioned that I was going to be coming to this meeting because I wanted to find out more about it. And I told him that we were going to be talking about Harney Peak.
Yeah.
He spent every one of his school years from kindergarten to 12th grade in Rapid City school system, and he had never heard of Harney.
Oh, wow.
And I was speechless, and told him just a little bit. I mean, I definitely know more about South Dakota history than he does, and because I've been living here the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But he's in Bend, Oregon. Anyway, it made me wonder about the school system.
I don't remember learning about Harney in our school
We didn't
system
learn
either.
about it. I grew up here. We didn't learn about Harney Peak.
No.
The reason why I know about it is because that guy took me climbing it
Yeah.
the last week that it was open to the public, or to automobile, to Jeeps. And we almost made it to the top before we.
Well, I wouldn't say almost, but yeah, we.
I think the only reason I know about it is because it's like a popular hiking place
Oh,
for my family that likes to hike.
Oh, it's a beautiful place.
History-wise, nothing, but I knew it
But in
existed.
defense of not knowing about Harney, what do the Oregon people know about Hood or Rainier in Washington? I mean, at least Harney was 75 miles, or whatever it is, to the White River here, or even, as I say, to Wasta, which is only 50 or 40 miles. I mean, Hood never left his office in London or Rainier.
Yeah.
I mean, but the same thing though, they're underling to kind of make nice with their superior. Say, oh, we're going to name this mountain Mount Rainier, and maybe Rainier will make me a admiral instead of a captain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's lots of mountains. And then what about poor states like Idaho, where Bora which is their highest point, is named after a man who was known as being a great stud. He was really good looking, and the women loved him, including Alice. What was Roosevelt's name? Alice. Oh, didn't she change her name when she married the other senator who she was cheating on?
Longworth.
What?
Longworth.
Yeah.
But he was the Speaker of the House, he was bigger than.
Yeah, but he apparently wasn't near as much fun as. So you could do worse. I mean, Harney was distinguished. I will use the word distinguished. Fierce and effective Indian killer.
And he did stick up for keeping Great Sioux Nation determined.
Yeah.
Which was suicidal. I mean, well, not suicidal,
Well,
but a lot of people didn't see that.
Unlike Custer, I don't think he had any political ambitions. He was a little bit jealous of his military honors and progress and stuff, but he had no desire to run for president or, I mean, he just wanted to get maybe that brigadier general turned into a major general or whatever. I don't remember what's up one above the brigadier. But virtually nobody made it before the Civil War. I mean, it would cost us too much to give you a title and then have to pay you.
I don't actually pay you.
Yeah. Okay, so let me give you some references, and then we better get out of here. And I'm sorry, I didn't know I talked so long.